name is Brittany Jones. I'm the blogger of BrittanyJJones.com, where I blog about my love of sewing with hopes to get you to come out of your comfort zone and sew new things for me. Welcome to my front zip pencil skirt tutorial. I'm so excited about this skirt because this skirt is something that you can put in your closet. You can pull out when you want to go somewhere special, when you're going to go out and just have some fun. You can probably even pull it off at work with the right accessories to go with it. So let's get into the supplies that we will need to make the front zip pencil skirt. For this tutorial, I will be using Simplicity 1465 as a guide. We will modify and alter this pattern, but this is the guide that I will be going off of. Now let's just say that you have a pencil skirt sloper. You can absolutely use that. Just go ahead and add your ease to your pencil skirt, and then we'll go over how to add your seam allowance so that we get the front zip in the right way. For the pattern, we will just be using pieces 1, 2, 5, and 6, which will be view A. The length of that skirt is a 22, so go ahead and grab your pattern. And I have a 22-inch zipper. I have one with black with gold metal, and I also have one black and silver metal. You can use any type of zipper that you have. You can even make it shorter if you want. Maybe you want a 16-inch zipper. That way you already have a split at the bottom of your skirt. So let's just say the skirt is 22 inches long, but your zipper starts here. You have a cute split right there at the end of your skirt. So you can play around with zippers and pick the kind that you want, but for the tutorial, I'm going to be using a 22-inch zipper. You also need marking tools. You can use any type of marking tool that you have. I have a marker here and I have some chalk. I'm going to be using the chalk because my fabric is black. Speaking of fabric, I have some black stretch sateen fabric, and you only need 1 yard of fabric. So go ahead and grab your fabric. I definitely recommend a stretch fabric, maybe a stretch denim, a stretch sateen. Those are my recommendations for this skirt. Also grab you some interfacing. You will need to interface your facing pieces, which is piece 5 and 6. You need your ruler. I'm going to be using this clear ruler right here because we're going to have to transfer our seam allowances. You're going to need some pins, some pattern weights, and you need some scissors to cut out your paper pattern. You need some scissors to cut out your fabric. Also have your iron close by because we need to fuse our interfacing and press our seams. So once you have your supplies all together, let's move on to cutting out our pattern. So for cutting out our pattern, I already have my tissue paper right here, so I'm going to open it up. And like I said, you only need pieces 1, 2, 5, and 6, which is the front, the back, and the front and back facing pieces. So go ahead and open it up and find the pieces that we need. Before we cut into our pattern, you need to decide which size that you will be cutting. For me, I know at my hips, I'm going to look at the finished garment measurements, not the measurements that are for the body measurements. Go down to the bottom of your pattern and look at your finished garment measurements. I know right now that my hips are a 49 or 49 and a half, so because I have stretch fabric, I'll be okay with the 48. However, my waist is about a 35 and a half, 36, so I'm going to cut the 20 for my waist, and I'm going to grade the pattern out around the hip area to accommodate my hips. So you go ahead and decide what pattern pieces you're going to need, and let's start cutting those out now. So go ahead and grab your scissors, lay your pattern out flat. Okay, so right here is piece number 1, and if you are not sure what the finished garment measurements are, they're also printed on your pattern. Just look on your pattern piece and you'll see the finished garment measurements right there for you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut out the whole pattern, and then I'll go back and I'll make my adjustments for my waist to hip. So first we need to make sure that we're going to cut the right dart. And just cut around your pattern pieces. Make sure that you are using your paper scissors and not your fabric scissors. Okay, so I have piece 1 cut out. Go ahead and cut out your piece 2, your piece 5, and your piece 6, and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so now that we have all our pattern pieces cut out, I have my piece 5, my piece 6, my piece 1, and my piece 2. I'm going to go ahead and quickly make some adjustments to make sure that my waist and hip will fit me. If you need to make your pattern adjustments so that you can fit your waist, if you have a smaller waist and fuller hips, you can go ahead and make those adjustments right now. I also want to mention that you will need a little bit of tape, just a little bit, and just a piece of paper because we do need to transfer seam allowance. So go ahead and grab a sheet of paper. This is just a computer paper, and just a little bit of tape because we will need that as well. My waist to the fullest part of my hips is 7 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the top of the pattern right here. I'm just going to measure down to 7. So I know that if I start on the 20 line up here at the waist, by the time I get to this curve where my hip is, I need to have graded over to that line for size 22. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my adjustments really quickly. I'm going to grab my hip curve ruler right here, just to make sure I get a really nice, precise line. I'm going to take my marker, and then I'm just going to grade up to where I want it to be. And so I'm just going to make that line a little bit better to make sure it's exactly on the 20, because I've cut my facing pieces a 20. So I need my waist area to be a 20 so they match these pieces perfectly. So I've already made my line on this pattern. I have to make the same adjustment to my other pattern. So again, I'm just going to lay my hip ruler down. And I already know that I'm going to be at 7 inches down. So I'm going to start there at 20 and then work my way over to the line for size 22. All right, so I've made my adjustment, so now I can cut on these lines. So again, do the same exact thing for the other side of the pattern. All right, so now we can go ahead and transfer our seam allowance so that we can have our zipper in the front. So let's do that now. Go ahead and grab your piece 2, which is your back piece. Piece right here, piece number 2, it has the center back seam, which means that it's not cut on the fold, which means that it has 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here to accommodate for the back zipper. So we are going to take away this 5/8 of an inch seam allowance because we don't need it on the back, and then after we've taken it away, we're going to cut our piece 2 on the fold. So let's go ahead and take away the seam allowance for our back piece. To do that, just go ahead and grab your ruler. You can grab your marker, your marking tool, and then we need to find our 5/8 of an inch mark. And so right now I'm just marking the seam allowance out. So I'm marking 5/8 of an inch on the center back seam. I'm not over here on the curve where my side seam would be. I'm right here down the middle where your zipper would be. So this is the center back seam, and I am just marking out the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on that seam. So you go ahead and mark yours out as well. Once you have your dashes, we can go ahead and connect the lines. Now we're not going to cut it off, we're just going to fold it because you may want to use this pattern again to actually make the pencil skirt as the pattern has it. So we're not going to cut it, we're just going to fold the seam allowance over. So go ahead and fold over your seam allowance that we just marked out. And so now our back piece, the seam allowance, is gone because we're going to be cutting this on the fold. So we can go ahead now and set that to the side because that piece is ready to go. Since we're working on the back, we're going to go ahead and take our back facing and we're going to do the same exact thing. Now we're not going to work on the side where the notch is. We're going to mark on the side that says center back, and we're going to take the 5/8 of an inch off this piece as well. So go ahead and get your ruler, and then we're going to mark out our seam allowance on this side as well, same way we did the other side. Mark out your seam allowance, make your line, and then we're going to fold back the seam allowance the same way we did to piece number 2, which is our skirt back. So now your piece 6 is without the seam allowance, so it should look like this. I did not touch the side that have the notches. I only took off the seam allowance for the center back side, and we only folded it back because we may want to use this pattern again later. So now those 2 pieces are done. Now let's move on to the front pieces. Go ahead and take your piece 5 and we'll start working with this one first. So for piece 5, where it says center fold, we're going to add 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to that because this is now our front piece and our zipper will be in the front. So we need to add the seam allowance to accommodate for the zipper. So let's go ahead and add that now. Go ahead and grab your paper, some paper scissors, and just cut off a little piece. We don't need a lot. We just need some that we can tape to the pattern. I'll grab my piece of tape here and tape it down. And now I can go ahead and add 5/8 of an inch to this. So right from the edge of the pattern piece, add 5/8 of an inch to it. Once you have it added, we can go ahead and now cut that out. And now we have added seam allowance to our front facing piece. We're going to do the same exact thing to our front skirt piece number 1. So we can set piece 5 to the side. And now we can move on. Now because piece 1 is long, I'm going to go ahead and cut my paper into strips. Okay, I'm going to grab piece number 1. And we're going to go to our center fold. Again, do not work on the side that has your notches and the curve. We're working on the part that says center fold. And we're just going to take paper to it to add our 5/8 of an inch to the center fold, because this is now where our zipper will be. So go ahead and put pieces next to your pattern. And we can go ahead and tape those down. So I'm going to grab some tape. Go ahead and tape yours to your pattern as well. I'm going to grab a longer strip here to go here. So now you should have paper taped to your pattern. So now we can go ahead and add our seam allowance to that now. So we'll go ahead and grab your ruler. Let's go ahead and mark up our 5/8 seam allowance. So I am starting from the pattern edge. And I'm just going to start marking up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, I'm at the part of the pattern where it says center fold. I am not where the notches are. Do not add seam allowance to where the notches are. Alright, so now we can go ahead and attach these lines. Now we can cut that out. So now you should have attached your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to piece 1 of your skirt. So now that is all done. Again, piece number 5, which is the front facing, has 5/8 of a seam allowance attached to it. We have folded in the seam allowance on piece 6, and we have folded in the seam allowance on piece 2. So now let's start cutting out our fabric. Okay, so let's just say that if you want the bottom of your skirt to kind of have a peg hem, meaning it's going to come in a little bit around your knees a little bit more instead of just going straight down. If you want that on your skirt, all we have to do is just get a ruler, and we can go in, I'd say up to 2 inches, but honestly it's your preference. I'm going to go in 1.5 inch on mine. So right now I'm working on pattern piece number 2. And on the side that has the notch, the side where the curve is, I'm going to take my ruler, and at the bottom of my pattern, I'm going to just mark in 1.5 inches. Like I said, you can go up to 2 inches if you like, but I'm just going to go to 1.5 inches. And I'm going to take my hip curve ruler, and I'm going to place it up here at my hip. And I'm going to line it up with that mark I just made, which is coming in, again, from the outside curve. It's coming in 1.5 inches. So I have it lined up where my hip is. And I'm just going to curve this, make this line so that it meets right up at that mark that I made. Then I'm going to take my paper scissors, and I'm going to cut that adjustment onto my pattern. I know a lot of people may not like cutting the pattern. You may want to keep this pattern intact and then trace the pattern and make adjustments, like the adjustment I made to my hip, the adjustment that we made by taking out the seam allowance, and this adjustment right here for the peg hem. You may not want to make that on your main pattern. You may want to just copy this so that you keep that intact. Honestly, I don't mind, because Simplicity, they go on sale for 99 cents. So if I need another one, I can easily just buy another one. But if you don't want to put these adjustments on your pattern, feel free to just transfer and make a copy of it. That way your pattern stays intact, and just make those adjustments. So now you can see on my pattern, I have pegged in the hem at the end, so now it doesn't just go straight down, it comes in a little bit more. And again, I went in 1.5 inch, so 1.5 inches I went in. I'm going to make that same adjustment to the front, the other piece of my pattern. So I'm going to take this one here, which is piece 1, the one that we added the seam allowance to. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to go in 1.5 inches at the bottom. I'm going to make a mark. I'm going to grab my hip curve ruler, place it up here at my hip. Again, I know that my hip starts 7 inches down, so I'm going to start where my hip is and then trace the marking down to this line that I just created. So once you have it, go ahead and trace your line. Make sure everything is even. Trace your line. That's going to give you, let me just make sure I have it good. There we go. That's going to give you a really good fit around. It's just going to bring in the skirt a little more, just to frame your body a little bit more instead of just going straight down. So that's the adjustment that I just made here on this pattern. So now we can go ahead and cut out our fabric. Okay, so for fabric, I'm going to be using 1 yard of black stretch sateen fabric. Okay, so I have my fabric right here and I have my right sides together. These are my selvage edges. So you go ahead and prep your fabric. Make sure that you have the right sides together and that you are looking at the wrong side. I'm just going to move my pattern pieces over a little bit so I can lay my fabric out the right way. My selvage edges are up here, my cut edges, and then my fold is here. So our piece 2, we're going to flip it down and we're going to put it on the fold. So this is the right side of my pattern. I'm going to flip it down so that now I'm looking at the wrong side of my pattern. And I'm going to use my pattern weights to hold it down. And just kind of position things, just to get things down. I'm going to take piece 1 and we're going to flip pattern piece 1 down as well. So go ahead, and this is the right side of my pattern. I'm flipping it down. And then for our facing pieces, we're going to leave these pieces up and we're going to put 6 right here on the fold, because 6 is the back facing and that has to be on the fold. And then we're going to take piece 1 and then we're just going to lay that up. So the 2 facing pieces are not down, they are up, and I'm just laying it down here. So piece 6 and piece 2 are cut on the fold. Piece 1 and piece 5 are not cut on the fold. Piece 1 is face down, piece 5 is faced up, piece 2 is face down, piece 6 is faced up. So now that you have your pieces laid out, go ahead and pin them down and we can start cutting. Alright, so now let's start cutting our pieces out. I'm going to take my fabric scissors here, and again I am cutting on the fold for piece 6. Before you move your pattern piece, we have to go ahead and transfer all our notches and dots. So I'm going to find my notches. I have one here that I'm going to mark. I have one at the top that I'm going to mark. And now we need to transfer our darts. So go ahead and grab you some pins and stick through your darts. Or however you mark your darts, you can go ahead and mark yours, but I like to just stick pins through. And because my fabric is black, I'm going to use chalk. And I'm just going to mark right against the pin. Lift it up and do the same exact thing. Okay, so now we can go ahead and move our pattern piece. And now we're done with piece number 2. To make sure that our dart is straight and we're not guessing, we're going to go ahead and connect those dots. So I'm going to grab my chalk. I have a ruler down. And I'm just going to mark up my dart. on both sides of my piece 2. Okay, so now we have our darts on both sides. We've notched at the top. We also notched on the side, so we can put piece 2 to the side and move on to the other pieces. Next, we're going to go ahead and cut out piece 6. So go ahead and cut around piece 6 the same way we did piece 2. Now we're going to notch before we move our weights up. There's no dots to transfer. So we're done with piece 6, and we can put this to the side. Go ahead and cut out the other 2 pieces the exact same way. So now your pattern pieces should be all cut out. The next thing for us to do before we can start sewing is to cut out our interfacing. So go ahead and grab your piece 5 and piece 6, and let's cut out interfacing, and we can go ahead and fuse it together now. So go ahead and fold your interfacing so the fold is on this side. You're going to take your piece 6 and we're going to put it right on the fold. Then we're going to take our piece 5 and we're going to flip that down as well. Now we can go ahead and cut around them. So now your 2 facing pieces should be cut out. So now we can go ahead and fuse them together. Now I'm going to go ahead and interface my 2 pieces. So again, I'm just going to bump over them right quick. Go ahead and take your pieces and make sure that it's wrong sides down. You find which sides have the notches. That side there and this side here. Lay it over. You can grab your pressing cloth and press. Make sure that you don't iron, that you only press for just about 8 to 10 seconds. Or per whatever type of interfacing you have. Your interfacing may tell you shorter or longer, so just go by the instructions on the interfacing that you have. Okay, once you're done, your pieces should be interfaced. Go ahead and do your other piece the exact same way, and then we can start sewing. Alright, so the first step to sewing our skirt is to put stay stitching around the top edge of both of our pieces. So your back piece is the piece that we cut on the fold. So go from the end of one and stop at the center, then go from the end of the other and stop. And for your stay stitch, you are stitching a 1/2 inch. So don't stitch on 5/8, which is your stitching line. Just stitch a 1/2 inch from each side to the center and from the other side to the center. For your piece 1, which is the front piece, we're going to stitch from the side to the center on both pieces. So go ahead and do that step first, and then after that, we can move on to sewing our darts. Stay stitching prevents your fabric from drooping, stretching out while we're constructing our garment. So don't skip out on that step and make sure that you do it. Let's go ahead and put our stay stitching in our skirt now. So I'm going to be working on our back piece, which is piece number 2. And again, we're going to work from the outside in doing 1/2 inch stitch. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. Right here, you can see that I have my stay stitch in at the top, and I'm going to move right along, and I'm going to do the same exact thing to these 2 pieces here. So go ahead and grab your pieces, and again, I'm working from the out toward the end. The next step for us to do is to go ahead and pin up our darts. So we can go ahead and flip it over. And we can start to pin our darts up now. So go ahead and grab some pins. And we can just follow the line that we created. So when you pin through, make sure that the pin goes through both lines. That way that you know that you are sewing exactly on your dart. Alright, so now that all your darts are pinned, we can go ahead and sew them down. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to start from the wide point of the dart, put our presser foot down, back stitch, and sew directly on your dart legs. Do not back stitch at the end, just sew directly off of the fabric, lift it up, And then we're going to tie the threads together. Now you go ahead and do these darts the same exact way. So now that you have your darts made in your skirt, you can go ahead and press them out now. So let's go ahead and do that. So the next step to making our zip front pencil skirt is to sew our sides together. So let's go ahead and put our skirt right sides together. We can go ahead and pin at the sides. Go ahead and find your notches. Once you have it all pinned, go ahead and do the same thing to the other side, and then we can sew it down. So now that both sides of my skirt are pinned down, yours should be as well. Make sure that you are sewing on a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So go ahead and find your 5/8 of an inch. Put your needle down, back stitch at the beginning, and we're going to sew straight down our stitch. Stitch at the end. So now one side is done. We can go ahead and sew the other side. So now the side seams of your skirt should be sewn. And now I'm going to go ahead and finish my seams with my serger. If you don't have a serger, feel free to use a zigzag stitch on your machine, or you can use picking shears. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my serger to finish off the seams of my skirt now. Another thing that I like to do while I'm over here is I like to go ahead and finish off the edge of my opening. So I want you to go ahead and take the front opening of your skirt, the part that's not sewn together, and now we're going to just go ahead and finish off this edge while we're already over here at our serger. But this time we're not going to trim off the seam allowance. We need that. So turn off your cutter, and we're just going to finish off the edge of our seam. Alright, so now all edges should be done except for the top of your skirt and the bottom of it. But we're going to go ahead and finish off the hem of our skirt because we're already over here, so we can go ahead and knock that out too. So go ahead and finish off the hem of your skirt now. Okay, so now our skirt, the edges are done, so we can go ahead and press out the seams that we made from our side seam. And then we'll be ready to attach our zipper. Alright, so now you should have the dart sewn on your skirt, your side seam should be sewn, and all your edges should be finished. Right now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the front opening of our skirt and we're going to press under 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and grab our iron. If you have a seam gauge, go ahead and grab it now. If not, you can just go ahead and use your ruler. But just go ahead and press up 5/8 of an inch on your opening. Press under, I'm sorry. So I'm going to find 5/8 of an inch on my seam gauge here. And I'm just going to press under 5/8 of an inch. Remember, this is the seam allowance that we added when we were cutting out our pattern. Now we're just going to press that up. Go ahead and do the other side. Perfect. Right on the front opening, we just folded up under the seam allowance. This is my seam allowance. We just folded that down and pressed it. I'm going to measure down 5/8 of an inch from there, and then I'm going to just put a little mark. Why? Because that is where we need our zipper to start. Just going to put a little mark right there so I know this is where I need my zipper to start at, so that it's even on both sides, and you're not trying to eyeball it and guess, is this going to match up perfectly? We're just going to go ahead and mark up 5/8 of an inch. Because that is where our facing, we have to sew our facing around. We're going to need that 5/8 of an inch to catch our facing. So now that you have it marked, go ahead and grab your zipper. So for my black skirt, I've decided that I'm going to use my Go zipper instead of my zipper one. So you can go ahead and unzip your zipper. And me looking down, I'm looking at the right side of my skirt. So for the right side of the skirt, I'm going to be using the piece that does not have the pull on it. So I have that side, I have that one set aside, and I'm only going to be using the one that doesn't have the pull on it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line this up. We already made our mark, so we know exactly where our zipper needs to start. Even though we have that excess from the zipper hanging off, we already have our mark of where we need our zipper to start at. So I'm going to go ahead and put a pin there. And now we can just start pinning our zipper to that side of the skirt. So I'm going to line everything up. So what we're going to do now is just go ahead. Now I do not recommend putting it right beside the zipper. You need room for the zipper to zip up. So go ahead and put it in and just start pinning the zipper down. So now you can see that I have pinned the first part of my zipper. So now we're going to put our zipper foot on our machine and we're going to sew this down. Okay, so now we're going to move on to doing our zipper. Go ahead and grab your zipper foot. I'm just going to use my standard foot that came with my machine. Okay, be careful not to sew your zipper teeth because it is metal and it will break. And again, I'm just going to keep the fold of my fabric aligned with the edge of my presser foot. So my fold is aligned right on the edge. I'm also going to change my stitch to a 3.0 just because I am kind of doing like a top stitch. I'm going to change it to a 3.0. And I'm just going to go straight down the zipper, making sure that I keep the edge of my fabric aligned with the edge of the zipper foot. And we're just going to sew it all the way to the end and make sure that you back stitch at the end. And I'm going to back stitch now. So now one side of our zipper should be already sewn down. It should look a little something like this. And you can see my stitching right here. It's about 1/4 of an inch away from the fold of the fabric. Now we're going to go ahead and do our other zipper the same way. You see how pretty that looks already because we already serged off and finished our edge. So now we're going to do the other side of the zipper the exact same way. So go ahead and grab it. And we're going to find a mark, the 5/8 of an inch when we measure down. Find that mark because we know we have to line up the zipper right there to start because we have to sew our facing. So make sure that you are lining up the start of the zipper right there. That way we already know it'll be even. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and start pinning the rest of the zipper in place. So you go ahead and pin your zipper in place like I am doing here. See, I'm just pinning it down the same way we did the other side. Alright, so I have my last pin in now. I have everything pinned. And you can do like a quick measure. You should have the same amount left over at the bottom. And you should have the same amount left over at the top. It should be the exact same amount. Go ahead and sew this side of the zipper the same way we did the other side. Again, I have the end of my presser foot lined up with the fold of my fabric, and I'm just going to start sewing all the way down. Make sure that you are starting at the top of the zipper and working yourself down, and not sewing down on one and then flipping the skirt and sewing up on the other. Just because if things do shift, you don't want the zipper to be off when you are done sewing. So start at the top with both and work your way down like I'm doing. And when you get down here and you're by the pool, just lift your foot up and then just zip it out of the way. Put your foot back down and then continue sewing. Back stitch, and now your zipper should be inserted. This is the time now that I will go ahead and try it on just to make sure it fits on your side seams, especially if you had to make any modifications like I did. So go ahead and zip your zip up and just make sure that everything is even and it looks perfect at the top. It's okay if you have any leftover, I do too, that we're going to attach our facing and that will cover everything up at the top. The bottom of your skirt, you should have the same amount left over at the bottom of your skirt as well. So now this is what your skirt should be looking like. Go ahead and give it a try and make any adjustments to the sides if you had to. I'm going to try on mine since I did merge my lines just to make sure that everything still looks good. And then we can go ahead and attach our facing. So now that we have our zipper in, I hope that you went ahead and tried on your skirt and made any adjustment that you need to. I tried on mine, and one side had a little bit of puckers, so I did take that in and smooth that side in a little bit. So if you had any adjustments that you needed to make, I hope that you already did that. So the next thing to make in our skirt is to take our facing pieces, and they should already be interfaced. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay our facing pieces down and match up our notches. You should have a notch on both sides. So I'm going to match up my notches here. Take the other one. And we're going to pin them in place. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine. We're going to sew our facing pieces down on the side. So let's go ahead and do that now. Make sure you go ahead and put your regular presser foot back on and put your stitch back at a 2.5. We're going to be sewing on a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you back stitch at the beginning and at the ends. Alright, so off camera, I'm going to go ahead and press open my seams. So I'm going to press these seams open, and then I'm going to serge around this curved edge all the way around my facing piece. I'll be serging all the way around here, and then I'll also be serging off the ends. This side that has the notches, I will not be serging this edge. So go ahead and do yours now. Okay, so I just serged off the full facing all around the edge of it, as well as the two sides, but as you can see, the top of it is not serged. So now we can go ahead and attach this to our skirt. So go ahead and grab your skirt. I'm gonna zip it down just a little bit here. And we're gonna fold over 5/8 of an inch on our facing as well. So you can go ahead and fold in 5/8 of an inch. I'm gonna start on this side. The reason I'm folding in 5/8 of an inch, because if this was an invisible zipper, we would be able to flip this out, and then we would just line up our raw edges and then sew everything around, and then we'll be able to sew it down and flip it in to be a really nice clean finish. But because this is not an invisible zipper and we've already attached the zipper down here, we are now just going to fold over our seam allowance, which is our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and grab your seam gauge and fold over your 5/8 of an inch. All right. Now we're going to line it up right sides together. Make sure that you are starting at the top. So we're going to line it up right sides together, and we're just going to pin all the way around our skirt, the facing of the skirt. So there, I have one pin in now. So now I'm just gonna go around the rest of the skirt. You should have a notch right here that you can go ahead and pin in place. Then we're gonna move to our side seam. We're gonna go ahead and put that in place. Everything should be matching up perfectly. Now we're gonna come to the front. We're gonna line up our notch right here. Grab your seam gauge so you'll know exactly how much to fold over. All right, that's my seam allowance, and it should line up perfectly with the fold of your skirt. Pin that down, and I'll put some more pins right here, right up top. All right, one more. And now we can go ahead and sew our facing around on a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and do that now. You have to make sure that you are on a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance because we do not want to accidentally sew our zipper. So if you put it on a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you should be right above the zipper, which is exactly what we want. So go ahead and put your zipper needle down and let's start sewing all the way around. Remember to back stitch at the beginning and at the end of your stitch. A back stitch. Lift it up. And now we should have your facing attached to your skirt. The next thing that we're gonna do is I'm not gonna trim this off just yet. I'm gonna hold off on trimming that off, but I am gonna go ahead and put some understitching on my skirt. So we're gonna turn up our facing and we're just gonna sew the facing to the seam allowance. I'm not gonna sew my skirt. I'm just gonna be sewing an understitch. I'm just gonna be attaching the facing to the seam allowance, and that will give you a nice clean roll when you are done with your skirt. And I'm stitching as close as I can to this seam. Here's my seam right here, and I'm stitching as close as I can to it. I'm gonna back stitch, and I'm just gonna go all the way around, making sure that I attach the seam allowance to the facing only. So now you should have understitching on your skirt. I don't know if you can see it, but I've understitched my facing and it is sewn to my seam allowance. So now we need to just close off this area of the zipper, and to do that, we're just gonna fold it over and sew it down. Now, if you feel that your zipper is too bulky, you can clip it off. You can fold it in and clip it off, or you can just fold it straight down, tuck it up under the facing, and sew it down, which is what I'm going to do because I cut it before and then it had that fraying and it just wasn't looking that great. So I said this time I'm just going to keep it on. But if you don't want to keep yours on, if you want to cut it, then by all means you can cut it short if you need to. But I'm just going to keep mine how it is and just push it inside the facing and just sew it straight down. We want to flip it over so that we are sewing right on the stitch that we already have beside our zipper. That way we don't have two different stitches showing. We just want one stitch. So we're going to fold it over. I'm going to put a pin right here. I'm going to sew straight down on the stitch that I already have right here beside my zipper. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now it's going to be a little bit bulky, but that's how we're going to do the facing right here. So go ahead and align everything up. It should catch everything when you sew it straight down. So let's go ahead and do it now. Go gently because it is bulky here now. Put a quick back stitch in it to hold it down. And just really take your time because it is a lot of layers. A lot of thick layers right here. When you feel that you have passed your facing, go ahead and put a back stitch in it. And when you flip it over, you should have caught your facing. See, my facing is caught, everything is sewn down. And on the outside, I only have one stitch showing. So let's go ahead and do the other side the same way. Back stitches in it to hold it in place. All right, so now that should be done. We're gonna move that out of the way, and when we zip up our skirt, everything should meet at the top beautifully. We have no excess. Everything is right there, even and beautiful at the top of the skirt. So now that our facing is all done, you want to make sure that you give that a good press. So make sure you press your facing down. If you want to, you could put some tacks up against your side seam, the seam allowance on your side seam and the seam allowance on your facing. You could put a couple tacks there just to hold the facing down. And so now we're going to go to our hem and go ahead and finish that up. But first we need to finish up the opening that we have down here. And the way that we're going to do that, first go ahead and unzip your skirt. And we are just simply going to do the same exact thing that we did to the facing. We're going to fold up that seam allowance and then we're going to sew right on that stitch that we already have. So go ahead and move your zipper out of the way, and we're going to follow that same stitch and we're just going to sew up our hem. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to turn it this way, that way I get a good look at it. And all I'm doing, I'm just folding it over and making sure it's nice and taut against it and not loose, so that way I can already follow this and go ahead and press my hem up. So I'm just going to start here. If you want to put your zipper foot on, you can. I actually think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and put my zipper foot on just because I'm right there by the zipper. I don't want to hit it. So, all right, I folded it up. So now let's go ahead and sew it down. Find that stitching line that you had and go ahead and sew your hem down. Back stitch at the end. Now you should have the start of your hem sewn down. The rest of it should be open. Go ahead and cut off your loose threads. Now we're going to sew the hem to the other side the exact same way. The last step is to press up our hem and slip stitch it closed. So let's go ahead and do that now. You can choose to just sew it down, but I'm going to slip stitch mine. And so for the slip stitching, I have my thread here. And I'm just going to start right here at the zipper, and I'm just going to just grab a little bit of it, pull through. Doing this all the way around your skirt. And once you're all done, you can go ahead and press it out and you can wear this, honey. Alright, so after you have finished your hem, your skirt is now all ready to wear. Here is my front zip pencil skirt, and I cannot wait to wear mine. Thank you all so much for joining me in this tutorial. Be sure to tag me in any photos that you make of it. I would love to see you rocking your pencil skirt. Thank you all again for joining me, and blessings to you. Bye.